Hi folks, welcome to the Dutch Embassy and London Cycling Campaign conference, and this is workshop 3 about low traffic neighbourhoods. So obviously anyone who isn't wanting to hear about how to design low traffic neighbourhoods, probably you're in the wrong workshop. Run, panic quickly, but hopefully you're all here for the right reason. As I was saying just prior to the start, do by all means kind of get ready to unmute yourself. This is going to be a fairly kind of interactive and hands-on session. It's also going to be a very fast-paced session because we're running slightly late. Apologies for that. So I'm Simon Munk. I'm the infrastructure campaigner for London Cycling Campaign, and I will pass over. And as many of you know, I was heavily involved in the Waltham Forest Mini Holland schemes. I've been very heavily involved in London Cycling Campaign's response to the street space plans and the rapid progress and change in London over the last few years. So I guess that's my intro. Over to Martin to introduce himself for Wittevenn+Bos. I hope I've got that even vaguely right.
I thought the boss would be easy for you. No, my name is Martijn Akkerman. I'm working as a transport planner at Wittevenn+Bos, so Dutch company. Well, I'm doing this for like 20 years. And on the screen, you see my daughter cycling to school when she was about 4 to 5 years old. I don't even remember. It's so common for us just to cycle to school on herself or by herself. And actually, for me, I think like 10 years ago, I realized it's actually not really normal to have these kind of things. So I decided to assist, well, let's say worldwide, in trying to give everyone this experience, which is great as a parent. So let's start, because you don't have much time.
No, absolutely. So I was going to start very briefly by saying, you know, in a way, this is an iconic image of low traffic neighbourhoods, really. Where is the car traffic? You know, well, there are cars on the street, but there isn't much traffic, you know, and because of that, you know, here is a young girl able to cycle independently to some extent, you know, and that's what happens when you get rid of a lot of the traffic. Now, here is another street, hopefully. Yes, there it is. In Oval, and while there are a heck of a lot more cars parked, very obviously, the independent travel of children remains the same in a sense. This is a scheme that's gone in during street space. So I guess we're going to start with what is a low traffic neighbourhood, and very simply, my view of what a low traffic neighbourhood is an area-wide scheme, primarily residential generally, that removes all the rat runs, the through traffic. So you cannot drive direct from one main road to another main road to cut 30 seconds off the lights or shave a minute off your Google Maps time. And these schemes, you know, involve all sorts of different filters. We'll talk about that later, all sorts of different approaches. But what is key is that removal of through traffic. And that ultimately everywhere, as you can see in this picture, everywhere in this area is still accessible by car. Every door is still accessible by car. You can still get deliveries and bin lorries and things like that, but you can't drive through. So, and as a result of that, we see huge walking benefits, primarily actually, but even bigger than that, possibly community benefits. The work of Donald Appleyard in the 80s showed how many friends people have on roads where they're quiet and peaceful, and cycling obviously benefits as well. So I'm very much hoping, you know, we've seen a huge expansion of that in London. For those of you outside London, I think we're starting to see some schemes. I hope more are coming very, very shortly. I think over to Martin for you know, I think this all starts with the Dutch as ever, and I think there is a really unique kind of understanding of how roads work that Martin can hopefully fill you in on.
Yeah, well, I thought let's as an engineer, let's bring in some simple diagrams or pictures. So I think, well, if you look back in the Netherlands, like in the 70s, when we had our Stop Child Murder protests, I think we reinvented or understood how important it is to have proper facilities for cycling and create low traffic neighborhoods. So we started, as you can see on the left, with like a cauliflower approach, or the woonerf, or woonerf, I've heard sometimes in the UK. And I think that lasted from like the 70s till mid 80s, so 85, maybe a couple of them in the 90s. And then actually we stopped doing cauliflower areas. And I think, as you can see on the left, you can see, well, no one can run through it with their cars. It's very, well, dense. It's easy. Well, you can't see that maybe here now, but it's easy for children to play on the streets. But it's also very complicated to navigate through as a pedestrian, but especially a cyclist. It's not so easy to get from one cauliflower neighborhood to the other one. And yeah, it's also, you can do this even in a new build area, but you basically can't copy this scheme into existing post-war or even pre-war residential areas. So I think that gradually developed into like a more sustainable safety approach, which we nowadays use, which is like, well, I often use the pyramid, and the pyramid has to be in balance. In the pyramid, if one of the elements is overstressed, then the whole thing collapses. So here you can see, well, today in our planning of roads and also in residential areas, we look at a function of a road. That's how we want to have it to behave, but we also want to have, to think about how do we want to use that road, what expected behavior we have from people, and how does that reflect into the design. So obviously this sounds very theoretical, but you can imagine if you create if you want to have like a very nice low traffic neighborhood, but you design it as a motorway, then probably it's not going to be, the use will not be, or the behavior from car drivers won't be that they adapt themselves to speed. So if you take that into practice, you can see that's explaining how the Dutch design principle works. To have narrow streets in residential areas, still have to park cars, add some green, and kids can play here. Although this was during, this photo was taken during I think schools were still open. So that's a very basic concept we use in all the planning. And today, I'm pretty sure during the workshop that I will add some to that later on.
And I think that's what's really wonderful about this is that, you know, the Dutch have been thinking about this for decades, and obviously in England and the UK we haven't been thinking about that for decades. We're now trying to retrofit some of these ideas of place and function, design and use into our residential streets, our main roads, and starting to talk about kind of distributor roads versus non-distributor, etc. So, you know, that's again Dutch experiences that have been going on for decades. And what I thought was fascinating about that last picture was you don't see the modal filter, because the whole area has been designed to discourage through traffic. And the more you design the area like that, the less you actually need to do in terms of hard measures. So we're going to move very rapidly on, and particularly very rapidly on because we're already running late, onto how we do this. And I think the big thing for London and street space, the big experience has been for, you know, and we've got 90 odd low traffic neighbours, over 90 low traffic neighbours that have gone in during the last 8 months, so a huge sea change in the amount of modal filtering going on around London. But what has happened is just about everyone has gone, oh, I wasn't consulted, I wasn't told, etc. So engagement and consultation is clearly emerging to be a massive thing. Naira, could you get that poll going, please? Would that be okay? So we're hopefully any second now there will be a poll popping up on the screen. Oh, there it is. And I guess really the big question here is what do we need to do before low traffic neighbours go in? And I think the simple answer, you know, and I'm hoping to see some of your responses to this poll while we're chatting, but the simple answer is to start to talk to residents, because the more that they feel included in this process, the more they feel like they understand it, and the more they feel like there's been a genuine conversation where they understand what's going on, the better. I think the other thing that's really emerged from London, I don't know whether it's the same in Holland, Martin, but is political will. You know, the more that there is a genuine political will, and you see ward councillors, and you see cabinet leaders, and you see the council standing up and saying, we're doing this because it's really important to do it, that is great. And the less you see of that, the more you see people saying, oh, we're just going to put this out, and if you like it we might do it, and if you don't like it we probably won't, the more trouble there is that comes from that. So I think engagement consultation, you know, we've got, LCC has got a document on this, a big guide, you know, Martin, I'm sure has got a massive experience on this. Naira, is there lots of results from the poll? Has everyone filled it in? Do you want to pop up the results on the screen? Martin, do you have anything to add on engagement and consultation as we're rattling through it?
Yeah, I think actually I have, because we were in the same position probably in the 90s, when we started with the sustainable safety concept. And I remember being young traffic engineer, we had to go out into like this, town centers and explain why we want to change the road layouts, why we want to narrow roads, etc. And we constantly had to explain why it's so important to have the balance, and why we can't say, well, we do something here, but we don't do it in your street because you don't like it, because then the entire concept will just fail. And And of course, you need a political buy-in to actually get that, get it organized, that people will actually do it, and politicians will not run away because of a few complaints from people. I think that has been quite a challenge. Now it's default, so now it's easy for us. But at that time, it wasn't.
I mean, this is one of the great things about the Dutch is you've kind of been through it all, but actually it's all the same. But you've been through it all like 40 years, 50 years, 30 years prior to us. So you see
no
those
social media.
Yeah, that's the great advantage. But you see all those Stop the Kindermort kind of protests, and you think, well, that looks eerily familiar. But we just did it like 3 years ago, not 50 years ago or whatever. So so I'm gonna just very quickly move on while we're still waiting for poll results, because I think people are still filling it out, to trials. Fairly obviously during Street Space we've had this amazing kind of period of time where schemes have just gone in, and they've gone in kind of all sorts of different ways. One of the great advantages of trials, you can see Jeanette Sadiq Khan did it with Times Square in New York and did a lot of trials. Is this ability to just do stuff really fast and move fast, but then tweak, and that's the great thing about trials. And I think that's a really important thing to understand, is that you put something in, and a month into a scheme, if there's a really clear emerging problem, we'll fix it in the trial. So I think trials is great. But I think, there's a real understanding now, you've got to let the schemes bed in. These are schemes that take, particularly low traffic neighbourhoods, they seem to take months and months and months to actually get to a settled state. So give it 6 months minimum on a trial, really, before you start actually thinking about what the end state of this is, but be ready to tweak. And I think it's really important to talk again to residents, even that's down to putting posters up next to the trial to explain what the heck you're doing and why this has changed. So many people just wander around kind of in a slight daze. We've all done it on our phones. So the idea of trials is really important to kind of keep communicating. Don't just think, we've done the scheme, it's done, we'll do some monitoring later. Do a lot of work on that. I think should we just shift straight on? I'm going to say Naira poll results again. Let's try that. No, yep, no. Okay, we're going to move straight on to the meat of this. Oh, look at that. 60% of people said make sure residents in the area understand. That's great. I mean, to be honest with you, all of those things on there are all really important things to do. Get the councillors and the cabinet ready to do that. Get a borough-wide plan, so that you know what you're talking about, distributor roads. Collect initial views from a wide range of people, not just because this is the classic, is you hear from the chair of the local residents association, who is, an elderly white man like me, and you just immediately, their back's up, they're a driver, they're on it, so talk to young people, talk to old people, talk to disabled people, talk to a wide range of people. Mythbusters FAQ is very important. Get a stock of ANPR cameras where the whole country is run out of ANPR cameras, and thoroughly brief a wide range of people. So that's, I think that's a wide range, but it's interesting to see residents understanding the LTN and the bedding in period came out as #1 by some way. Right, moving on to the meat and the potatoes of this, or for vegetarians like me, the veggie burger and the potatoes. There is, I'm going to bring up a Google map, and by all means copy. I'll put the URL in the chat. I've picked, to try and be neutral as we can be, we've picked an area of Greater Manchester, and really what I want is everyone to turn on their mics now and just talk about this area. Fairly obviously, you can see there is some very obvious A roads, the A56, the A415, 5145, and there's some B roads around this area, which you could call Furswood. I think there's another name for it further down that I'll try and get to down here. But anyway, this area is, in my view, ripe for a low traffic neighbourhood, but it is completely unknown to me. It's a bit of Greater Manchester, it's not a bit of London, and we wanted to pick an area that wasn't kind of home territory for many of us. So if there are any Mancunian officers and councillors on the call, apologies for picking an area at random. But I guess the questions to start asking is, when we design a low traffic neighbourhood, what should we be looking for? What are the considerations that we should think about? And please stick your mics on and start shouting things. Because if you don't, I will. Martin will.
Schools, playgrounds.
So if we zoom in a bit, I'll try and zoom in a bit. We'll see if we can see some schools. Is that, I mean, one of the things I would say straight away is where are the boundaries? I don't know about you, Martin. When you're designing an LTN, I mean, my first thing would be, where's the natural end of it all? And is it like, because if you kind of look at it and you go 5 miles square without any boundaries, you're in trouble. But yeah, let's try and, I'll zoom in a second. We'll see if we can spot some schools. I can see it.
Sorry, Simon, there's definitely a school down there in the middle of the bottom that I went to primary school with.
Great.
I've just hovered over it. Hopefully that means you can all see it.
It wasn't. It's not that one actually that I went to. There's another one around there as well.
Okay.
Called Oswald Road at the time I was there.
Brilliant. I've just spotted another one over here. St Margaret's over here. So we've got two church primary schools. We've got over here that looks to me like a sports ground and a medical centre, community centre. So we've got a masjid there, and I spotted one over here as well. So we've got some religious centres. We've got some kind of other centres. Now, one of the things that I'm going to zoom in a little bit now. So the first thing is and this is the big question, is where's the edge?
Yeah, I'd say where's the edge? And nowadays we are so lucky with the Google traffic that you can, if you look at it for like a week or so during peak hours, you can get an impression of where are all those cars to see where's like or a natural edge or let's say red run stretch. Where's all the transit stuff going? Just to get a bit of impression, where can we find also, let's say, a natural boundary?
It would be really helpful. You said, Simon, this is like a natural area that's sort of crying out for a low traffic neighbourhood. It'd be really helpful if you could explain why that is, why it lends itself to low traffic neighbourhood.
So I only say that in the sense, and I'm just putting the URL in the chat. There we go. So anyone can look at this on their phone and zoom in and out as we're chatting. I only say this because it's a very clearly bounded area. So you've got on screen at the top, you've got at the moment, you've got this massive set of main roads. And in fact, you can see there's a second set of main roads where just at the top of there, that's where you'll see my cursor, hopefully, and if not, then Talbot Road into Stretford Road is a really strong kind of clear boundary. So if I jumped into Street View, you would see these are all very, very clearly main roads. The interesting one, and the one that I think both Martin and I were talking about, and in fact, I think this Manchester Road might be a really main road, but the one that Martin and I were talking about that was really quite interesting was this road here. It's a great stone road into King's Road on either side. And if I try and get up on satellite, you can hopefully, we'll see it in a second. You can see that that's kind of one of those roads where straight away it's not quite as obvious what you do with this. But I think the simple answer was just on size. I went around looking, and on size, one of the things you'll see is there's not tons and tons of shops inside this area. So there's a couple of little kind of parades and smaller shopping bits, but it's not like a massive high street, nor are there really heavy duty bus routes apart from, now can we see that? Yeah, there we go. There's the roundabout there. So I'll zoom in a bit further on that. So this is like, there's an east-west through here. There is quite a strong bus route with several bus routes on it. But the rest of the area there's not tons of public transport. There's not loads of shops. It is a very heavily residential area. And so the roads in here lend themselves. Oh, it's done something weird now. There we go. So you can see we're back on. It's freaked out, and we're back onto not satellite. But you can see there's a few shops around this roundabout, and you can see there's a bus route. Martin, you had some thoughts about this when you were looking at it. So this is right in the middle of the area.
Yeah, well, of course, such a huge roundabout took my attention, and I think, hey, what's doing that in a large residential area? And apparently, everything comes together here in this between those the fenced area, basically with this big A roads. So you can immediately see this is like a shortcut for everyone to drive through this residential area in case of some peak loads somewhere on this those boundary roads. So the first thing I had in mind was, what if you could kind of cut this into little pieces, so we create like 4 low traffic neighborhoods just at this spot is probably the main, let's say, connector of those 4 elements. And you could still make sure of ensure that this bus route can stay in. You can, of course, with a specific type of filters, you could actually organize that. And that's just, well, of course, I haven't been to the place at all, but I can imagine with just a few tweaks, we can already start doing something here.
So would the boundary be that area that you say there's the main, the yellow kind of main roads, and then there's the sort of smaller, but still quite primary roads, and that would be the boundary?
Yeah, like the Manchester Road, for instance, that looks like a boundary. And this one could be, of course, you can say, well, we turn this whole area into one huge low traffic neighborhood, but probably you will still have like the King's Road and the Great Stone Road. If the connector and the roundabout stays open in every direction, it will still be used as well, let's say a distributor road, or well, to avoid being stuck in traffic on Manchester Road or Talbot Road in peak hours. So
the low traffic neighbourhood would be that very small area between King's Road and Great Stone Road, or it would be, no, it'd be bigger than that, but you'd keep those ones open to through traffic.
Yeah, and you could actually do it in such way that it's still possible to drive from King's Road, for instance, into Great Stone Road in the northern direction, or in the southern, but just not to have the entire roundabout, which creates well, there's links between those big A roads, the direct links, because if the detour is long enough, it's no longer interesting to use it as a reference street.
This is the wonderful Dutch approach is, is to say essentially at some point drivers give up, so you just make it circuitous enough, just circuitous enough that no one on Google Maps or Waze bothers. I've just pulled up the measurement, and it's about 800 meters from the roundabout to the Manchester Road. So that is probably quite an ideal cell size, but doubling it wouldn't be the end of the world either. So I'm quite bold when it comes to this kind of stuff, and my view is always get all the through traffic gone, make it impossible. And on that basis, I'd take the whole thing and put a bus gate in there. Then you've got these amazing benefits for bus journey times through the area. You can still drive in, you can still get to the shops, but you just, you can't, there'll be a cut-off point at which the bus can go through east-west, but you can't, so, and that would be, potentially really good, and likewise north-south with the Great Stone Road, you can see that in the few months, and this is the classic, what we're seeing in London at the moment is if you don't put, if you don't kind of deal with these sub-distributor roads carefully, what happens is, you close all the residential roads, and the first 3 months, all the traffic comes out onto the main roads, it all gets displaced, it's all terrible, it all bungs up. And then what happens straight away is your Great Stone Road, your King's Road, whatever, they immediately bung up as well as kind of secondary remaining distributors. And all of it settles with time. It's really important to remember these are the type of schemes where you get 3 months of really heavy duty displacement, but after a year, it's all pretty much back to where it was before in terms of the distributors. It is a really important question to ask, is that King's Road really best used as a distributor, a kind of a small distributor? Is it best partially filtered, or is it best completely filtered? I don't know if there's any right answers to that, Martin. Is there?
No, I don't know that. You know that you need to look into the details, but partially filtered, you mean only for public transport, or you mean during certain periods of the day?
Yeah, exactly.
Because I'm not a big fan of having like temporary closures during the day, because you still keep the road open, and only a couple of hours of the day you can't drive there. But motorists will still remember, and all our navigation devices will still divert the traffic to this road. So you can't make the change into a more livable street, and maybe in future when there is a budget or I don't know, renewal of sewerage system, actually provide some lane narrowing and create more space for pedestrians. You can't do if you have like a temporary situation. So I would much rather have a full
filter halfway down the King's Road, so that I'm just thinking similar to Simon will know Capworth Street, just around the corner from where I live. So that was a terrible rat run, but now people can still go halfway, and then so people could come down to King's Road and then turn off up towards the Old Trafford Cricket Ground and the A5104, or they could come in from the left. What's that? East. West, and go down. Yeah, you know what I mean. So
what I like here is that you have the option to create like small circuits, which are not really attractive for people that want to drive all the way straight line to bypass the busy roads, but you also avoid to have like dead end streets, because I think we all know that a dead end, it's just not really working, or maybe it works, but for the car drivers, but also for delivery vans, all kind of people that if they have to drive in reverse, you create another dangerous situation. So if they can somehow have a nice tour without having a filter in the middle of the road where they have to put back in reverse, I think that works better generally.
I was going to say, I mean, we had to, for time reasons alone, we had to go. Martin had a great picture, a great Google Maps picture of an area in Holland where he lives, where there's loads of roundabouts that don't let you kind of cut you off from going through an area, so that they allow you to go in, loop around, come back out, but they don't allow you to kind of then cut through. So there's just, I think that idea of allowing cars to circulate within the area and get to everywhere fairly easily, but not cut through is absolutely brilliant. And I think we've touched on other types of filter, which we're going to come back to, so we've talked about time limited filters, cameras, we're going to come back to that. But what I was going to talk about now and ask, and it kind of really seems prescient given Carolyn's question, is kind of placement. And are there any principles, Martin or anyone, by which you work? One of the things that we've heard in London is, you have this choice of, do you place all of the filters in the middle, as far away from the main roads as possible? In this scheme, would you filter all around that big roundabout, for instance, and therefore what you've got is lots of different access routes in and out from all of the different main roads? Or do you put filters on the edge, and if so, why? And then limit the number of accesses in and out. In London, during street space, we've seen actually both kind of approaches. The Fox Lane scheme in Enfield is very restricted down to kind of two entrances and exits, to a large area. So everyone comes in via one of two entries and exits. Other schemes have been the absolute polar opposite and all in the centre. I think one of my personal kind of understandings of that is that you tend to see filters on the outside if what you want to do is then enable a crossing straight across the road from the end of a dead end road straight across the main road to another dead end road. That's a really useful way of putting a filter at the edge. The other one is if you've got cycle tracks at the edge, because it means there's no turning movements across them on the main road. So those are kind of examples of why you might do the edge. But Martin, have you got any sense of this area, and in general, do you look to place filters in the middle, on the outside, or somewhere else entirely?
Yeah, if we would place them, because we try, of course, in new situations to design it in such a way that you don't need them. But if you would place them, I'd rather place them at the outside. For instance, as like at this roundabout, the cut could be like a couple of bollards, but it could also be a cycle track, a dedicated cycle track, which actually connects east and west part of King's Road, or a cycle track and a bus lane for a small section. To have that kind of filter, which is also a bit more functional than just, the planters are great, they're cheap, but they are not adding anything else than having them filtering the traffic. And I think if we can design it in such a way that it's easier and that it also has a function, for instance, to create a cycle track, that works better.
I
Well,
really like that idea.
Yeah, and what we often do is try, for instance, to have the access to a low traffic neighborhood street. For instance, if you come from like I don't know, Summer Grove into the area to a quieter street, you have like a continuous footpath. So you already raise, let's say, this junction a bit on the side of the low traffic neighborhood street, which also gives immediately an information to a car driver that, okay, so by having this kind of speed bump alike continuous level footpath, you actually get the impression that, okay, I'm entering a zone where apparently something's going on, so I have to slow down or I have to change my behavior. And that's what we often do to mark, let's say, a location where we want car drivers actually to behave differently. Having said that, of course, for cyclists, that's not really ideal, but of course that's balancing out how what needs to be done. But generally I would say we do this on the outside and not so much halfway roads. We don't place filters, ideally not.
So I just wanted to check with everyone, because Carolyn and I are both residents of Waltham Forest, and firstly just gibbering away quite happily, and secondly we've got extensive experience of low traffic neighbourhoods but also continuous footways, and so I just wanted to check with everyone else. Firstly, there's a lot of silent people on this call, and I was just hoping that some of them might actually want to kind of ask a question of this area. We'll move on fairly shortly, but the other thing is just so that everyone is aware what a continuous kind of footway is where the pavement looks like it runs straight across the edge of the crossing of the road, as it were. In Waltham Forest, these have been, and we've not seen those go in during the street space programme because the nature of all the schemes that have gone in is so utterly temporary, and temporary materials. But where we have seen them going on in Waltham Forest, and there's been some other places, we've what we've seen is an initial wave of real anxiety about them, kids just going straight out across the side road, mouth of the side road, but eventually they settle down, and people really, it does seem to really represent, if designed properly, a kind of a real step change in the way that drivers see the area they're entering and see their behavior appropriately. So I think they've been great, but they're still, in the UK, they've only just made it into the new DFT's design guidance. They're still, I guess you'd call them controversial, but hopefully not. As Ricardo said, if you want to stick your hand up, Taylor McCardle, I see you've just turned your camera on. So if you want to say hi and say something, great. Otherwise, we will move on fairly quickly. And I've had a question in the chat before we get to you. How do you stop unauthorized cars from entering at points that are open for exit or for restricted entry? Is the aim to install automatic rising bollards or cameras? So we're going to come to the types of filter, but I think, as Martin said earlier, I think both of us view, drivers will always try and do, people will try and game systems, people will try and sneak through if they can. So my view is always physical interventions that just totally stop behavior completely are the answer to that kind of thing. So you design to not enable that behavior at all. Over to you.
Yeah, that's also my view. All kind of temporary measures or ANPRs. You create a negative experience in a way. If people get a ticket at home, well, the penalty, it's a negative experience caused by an LTN. It's just not the message you want to bring across.
Taylor, did you have a question?
No, I was just saying hello because I put the camera on.
Welcome. Well, I think if Carolyn, anyone else have any more points to make about how to design them? Because then, if not, let's move on to the types of filter, and we'll do a few minutes on that, and then we'll actually just do some more Q&A at the end, basically, and have some general chat. So I'm going to stop the share on this, and we'll all briefly see each other, and then I'm going to start the share on filter types. So here we go. Or not. Yeah, there we go. Sorry about that. So moving on from Martin's last slide of the wonderful Dutch low traffic neighbourhood. This is a rather uglier iteration. So this is a camera enforced filter. As you can see, there's a big gap. Now we know, and I was talking to Martin about this earlier because he was like, why would you do that? We know that a lot of emergency services at the moment are raising real issues around the design of low traffic neighbourhoods. They want to be able to drive through very fast. They don't want a physical impediment. Now, we also know long term that all of the low traffic neighbourhoods that have gone in the UK, many private, cul-de-sac estates that have been designed by that cauliflower method that Martin was talking about, they work fine. The fire brigade response times in Waltham Forest went down after low traffic neighbourhoods went in. The long term is that this is probably a bit unnecessary. And I think, and I don't know, Martin, if you want to jump in, but I think the issue again is that you can see in this photo, there's a car just having driven through the filter. So even with cameras, you kind of get a low level of non-compliance, which means you're not going to see kids playing out on the street here. And in fact, certainly in my area, there seems to be a belief amongst drivers that if they really speed up really fast, then somehow they won't get a fine. That'll be somehow magically they'll avoid all of this. So the non-compliance element and the kind of unfriendliness element, I think, is a real issue with these. But if the emergency services say this is what you need to do, for now at the very least, this is what you need to do. And the great advantage of these things is they do rack up a huge amount of money in the first few months for cash-strapped councils at the moment. That's not a bad thing, I think. And then there's a trickle of funds that means that they pay for their maintenance long-term, and even a bit above goes back into your highways budget. So I think there are some pros, and particularly where they're needed. Martin, what your take on these?
Yeah, well, my take on this is when I look at the picture, I feel like, well, this is a way to start. And I made say that with a small laugh, but it's a way to start in that sense that people will, well, sooner or later get used to the fact that this is no longer open for cars. But if I look at this picture, it looks so, there's so much red and yellow, and it's screaming a lot. So I would really, the next step would be, I think, if I was working in the councils, try to keep up that conversation with the emergency services about, we really want to redesign this area into something nicer, and to create a filter which is, you can use it, emergency vehicles can use it, and at the same time, cyclists, pedestrians can go there, but we really physically block car traffic, but in a nicer designed way. So that some green, and all our landscape architects can do a better job here. So that sense, I think, I don't like ANPRs for obvious reasons. That, like I said, penalties connected to 8 LTNs is like, you already were not happy that you couldn't drive there, and then you also get a fine. So it's a bloody LTN here. And that's just not the message we want to bring across to car drivers. We don't want to punish them. We just want to avoid that they are here.
Yeah,
so
and I think it is really
thinking.
In the UK, we're so many generations away from, I grew up, I'm 50 now this year, and I grew up playing out on streets in London. I grew up in London, but I was probably the last few years of kids who could do that. So we've got decades of children who haven't been able to play out on the streets. And what's really noticeable is the filters like this, you just don't see kids playing out near. But the filters that are physically completely block off the road, as we'll get to in a minute, you see kids playing out near them, and I hope that over time, and in fact I know over time what happens is they gradually move away from the filter, but they need that sense of physical reassurance that there's no cars coming through here to start with. Let's see if we can get...
I think we also, looking back at the 90s, this is maybe not in this way, there were no ANPRs in the 90s, but we also used a lot of planters to reduce lane width and reduce car speed. So we also use that, but nowadays we have luckily a different approach. So it's not that I'm saying this is bad, it's just the start.
Yeah, but so something possibly even uglier for the next slide. So this is what's called a turtle balance.
At least it's temporary though. It's like school times, drop-offs and stuff.
Yeah.
So this is fairly obviously this is a school street. I think it's in Westminster, and I don't know whether this is operated by the staff or we're seeing quite a lot of school streets going with volunteers operating them, like parents operating them, things like that. School streets, I think, are great. You know, that they're a really low controversy, good start again to kind of doing this stuff. You know, and for some roads, you know, Hackney has done some roads which were bus roads, you know, pretty major kind of through routes. They've done some school streets on, just totally disrupt the rush hour in a kind of brilliant way. And you know, the result you see, and I wish I'd put up the video, there's a great video of some of the Hackney ones. It's just kids everywhere, you know, all over the place. Martin, do you have a school streets a thing in Holland or not? Or is this just we're so far behind the curve that you just went straight past them and went straight to...
No, we have them. And I think also school streets are a big, well, let's say, challenge in the Netherlands as well. To try to get parents not using their cars to go and meet with the kids. So, well, to be honest, I think what we often do is we totally redesign the area to make it look totally different. So from a tarred road to a, let's say, more block pavements, a bit narrower, adding some colors and all that stuff to make also, well, visually communicate that, come on, people, you have to slow down here, or be aware this is a school zone. I think that's all we often do, but we don't block the street during peak hours, at least not that I'm aware of. It's more in the design.
So I think this is Dulwich Village, I think, which is just someone, again, if you've not seen it, there's someone, I think Dulwich, one of the Dulwich groups put up a video yesterday of kids, and Chris Boardman from Greater Manchester and ex-Olympic athlete, tweeted saying, you know, this is the first time I've ever seen a bit of the UK that looks genuinely Dutch. Now, this photo doesn't look particularly Dutch, but a photo of kids just streaming through the area at school time it's quite spectacular to watch, and it is genuinely feels like this is the shifting point. These are planters. Now, from my point of view, we've done a design guide with LCC. We did a design guide base design guide for you know, offices and engineers. I think that the key thing I'd say here is 1.5 meter gaps, and actually really important to notice is they've lined up the planters with the lamppost. So that the cars don't just drive round them on the pavement, as we saw in several early like LTNs during street.
Yeah, we had one where we had to put a post in on a verge.
Yeah.
So 1.5 meter gaps gets you, you know, yes, mopeds can still go through there, but means pretty much every type of cycle can, you know, even side by side tandems and you know, cargo bikes and things can get through there, but no car really can get through a 1.5 meter gap. In fact, I came across very early on in Waltham Forest's Low Traffic Neighbourhoods, I came across a guy who'd wedged his car between a tree and a planter and was angrily kicking the planter. And I was like, well, you're the guy that drove through a 1.5 meter gap, you know, well done you. He nearly managed it, but like the side of his car, you know, it wasn't good. Martin, do you want to say anything about planters and or?
Yeah, well, yeah. What shall I say about planters? I think I'm not so familiar with adding planters in our designs. Actually, well, we did a case study in Oslo a couple of years ago, and we also introduced planters, and they were a great success because people, of course, obviously like to have the first green elements in their streets, which is a good thing, I guess. But in general, of course, we prefer to design it slightly different, but that's costing you a lot more money. So I think this is a very cheap solution. But if I look at this, and I hope there is some street light there, because they are not really having any, let's say, protection for cyclists. So if you are cycling there at night and there's not enough light, you could actually crash into them.
Yeah.
So London roads are pretty well lit.
Yeah, you need to have it really well lit. Otherwise, I think that's where I see a potential danger in adding planters.
London's like that anyway.
Yeah.
You don't really find many roads that are dark.
No, I know. In London, I know. I don't
know. Well, I'll jump onto the next photo. My colleague Simon Still recently had quite a bad injury from running straight into one of these.
Oh, really?
Nice black bollards. Yeah, I see a nice black bollard. Yeah.
Absolutely. Pitch dark bollards in a dark bit of Lambeth somewhere. Yeah. Just went straight into it and was like, rang me up and said, yeah, I think I've got a cracked rib, you know, something like that. So,
yeah, they should you can actually see where there's a space for reflectors to be on those bollards.
Yeah.
Not.
Yeah, if we design them like this, we have a big issue in the Netherlands because, well, this actually creates a liability issue in the Netherlands. But the street owner, the council in this case, would actually be held liable for the accident because it was not very well visible. And our design standard forces you to add a lot of introductory road markings with some ripple strips, I think it is, so that you're really, as cyclists are warned that you have to be careful here.
Well, I think that the thing that I would say as well is there's a great game by, I think, a British expat in Holland called the 50 bollard game, which is how much of your area can you filter with just 50 bollards.
50 bollards.
Just because, you know, that's what is that, 5 across the road or whatever, and that's you know, that's a big chunk of an area probably filtered there. So I think that's the end of the kind of like, these are different types. Now there are loads more types of filters.
Well, I would like to say with this one that I see here, let's say, a conflict between filter and landscape architecture and how to get this look attractive in the area, which is usually not the best for traffic safety. To use black colors and well, it's nice to have nice tones, but you need to have a bit more, let's say, warning. But that's often what's interesting to see.
Brilliant. We've got a few minutes left.
Yeah.
So I was going to say, are there any other questions at all about low traffic neighbourhoods?
I suppose what I'd like to ask is those different methods of filtering that we've just looked at, how they kind of compare in terms of cost. Because I'm lead member for this type of thing in Haringey now, although only newly appointed. Obviously, we've met Simon previously, but obviously I'm kind of getting into this properly for the first time, and we've had some bids that went in ages ago, long before my time, and they've come under some criticism for being quite high, and I'm just wondering, you know, what the different kind of cost profiles of the different ways of filtering are.
Well, I was going to jump in. I'm going to let Martin jump in any second now. I was going to jump in and say, actually, one of the filtering types that we didn't cover, which we should really in a way, is opposing one-ways. You know, so you can actually design an area using one-ways just to ensure that, again, you cannot go through, you know, so you have a one-way to a crossroad and then the one-way coming the other way and these other, those can be very, very cheap. I think bollards, as I said earlier, are really quite cheap, and planters are quite cheap. It starts to get expensive in terms of capital outlay when you start throwing in cameras, and particularly when you start gold plating your kind of engagement and consultation and all that kind of process. But the other advantage, as I said earlier, of cameras is while the capital outlay is quite pricey, they can and are clearly, being in London, a bit of a revenue generator on the back end. So they pretty much, you know, unless you're basically trying to do an area with 50 cameras in, you know, where the cameras are all going to just pick up the same rat runner 50 times. I think, you know, cameras are quite, you know, they'll end up giving you money rather than the other way around. But so I think, but none of these things are, you know, LTNs are the cheapest thing possible to do, short of speed humps or something like that, I guess, really. Martin.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. You know, the simple bollards and planters are very cheap. I think it becomes more expensive if we do it like a bit more in the Dutch way, where we have like the, let's say, little bit raised islands where we put on the bollard, which is obviously safer for a cyclist, so you don't crash into the bollard immediately because it's put on an island. But then you need to obviously invest in some bricks and concrete to actually create that island. That's often where I would say that adds a little bit of cost, and it becomes really expensive with all those continuous level footpath crossings to mark, let's say, the exit or entry of a LTN. That's costing money, but on the other hand, it also adds a lot. So let's say if adding planters and bollards is the first step, then just keep this in mind for the next round of budget to actually improve it even further.
We were talking, Martin and I were talking about this. You know, we're in a situation right now in a crisis. You know, the funding levels have gone through the floor for boroughs. You know, it is really tough times, and yet you could still do these schemes. But I think absolutely the long-term aim is you keep coming back and saying, well, okay, now we can do a bit more public realm work. We can do a bit more kind of work to make it. But the other thing on that is you start to see some community buy-in. You know, the Lambeth, the Railton Road planters, some rogue, you know, as well as people taking over the planters and starting to plant them, some rogue carpenter has installed a bench on one of them. There's people sitting on it, things like that, which is just lovely, you know. So I think there is, but I think, you know, the starting point can be very cheap. And actually, I was going to say, I've seen a couple of boroughs where they've got some concrete blocks, you know, for emergencies or whatever in the yard, and they've just rolled them out for a few months. You know, that's your starting point.
Yeah, and I think they offer great opportunities for like community projects. To actually, once the space is created, how can we together design our space with our community, with our street? And that's like adding some planters or adding, let's say, some terraces at the parklets. I think that's all possible once everyone realizes, hey, this is what we already achieved, and now it's the next step. Also, getting that community buy-in, I think that's also great with this system.
On that note, I think unless we are on,
we are already
we're on that buzzer. Hopefully that's been really, really useful. Thank you so much for participating. Thank you so much for turning up. I hope it's been really good. What we need to do now apparently is probably go back into the main webinar link, conference link.
A little quick question.
Oh, go on.
So apart from like the cameras, like what would you suggest for limiting like mopeds and stuff going they're normally guilty of speeding quite heavily.
To be honest with you, so Waltham Forest has got tons of these all over the place, and we've got loads of Uber Eats drivers and, you know, delivery drivers and whatever. And actually I think they did some mobile enforcement for a while, and that really helped. But actually, what you'll see now is you'll see every now and then I'll see a moped coming the other way, and they'll slow right down and give me like a nervous wave, and then kind of go off. It seems to work okay, but I think there may be quite a lot of enforcement on that, you know, mobile camera enforcement and stuff like that. Certainly, all of the planters here have like a big flying no motorbikes, no cars sign to really ram home the point to say, you know, you could face a fine. Right. I think we have to close it off there because otherwise we're going to be very, very late. Thank you so much.
We can talk for hours. Yeah. Thanks a lot, everyone.
See you back in the conference. I'm going to tell these guys to end it all and go back.
Okay.
Go.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.